Story 1. The doors of stone. The elevator rumbled and shook as it descended. I could hear the massive gears grinding into place as they lowered the cage-like box deeper into the earth. I felt my heart racing in my chest as the humming of the generators grew more and more distant, and the light from above filtered away into darkness. The descent was much faster than I'd anticipated it to be. My fingers gripped the bars in front of me, watching the walls of the dirt tunnel speed by. Small chunks of soil and debris clatter dully to the steel floor of the elevator, bouncing against my boots. I couldn't see very much or for very long. The overbright lights had been installed every 100 meters, leaving me listening to the sounds of the descent in complete blackness for large chunks of time. Lower and lower I went, the meters flying by large chunks at a time. Depth status, 250 meters, chimed an automated voice. My breath began to steam over my glass visor, and a notification appeared in my periphery. Warning: rapid decreased temperature detected. Approximate external temperature, -5 degrees Celsius. That couldn't be right. It should be getting warmer, not colder. There was no way the temperature could be sub-zero this far down. I tried to remember if the director had mentioned anything about temperature fluctuations during the briefing, but I was blanking. All I could recall was what I was supposed to do once the elevator stopped. Depth status, 500 meters. Another notification appeared shortly after the depth message. Approximate external temperature, -18 C. Unsure of how to proceed, I pressed the largest circular button on the inside of wrist, causing a command prompt to appear at the center of my visor display. Please state your command. The toneless female voice momentarily replaced all sounds in the elevator. There was a bright flash of light as the elevator quickly flew past another light. Contact the surface, I said aloud, my voice muted and dull within my helmet. Contacting surface, the voice responded, and I was left listening to a series of rhythmic beeps. This is Commander Jones. What's your status? I swallowed before responding, my throat suddenly dry. This is Cartographer 4. Status clear. I'm calling to report an anomaly. Granted, the commander told me. I could hear him exhaling loudly into his mic. My life support system has detected a drop in temperature from 30 Celsius to now -18. How should I what do I like? Is this normal? Or... My tongue tripped over my words as I struggled to figure out how to put my statement together. My foggy breath now completely obscured my view. Relax, the commander instructed, his voice even and calm. The director did mention that there could be any number of fluctuations the further down you get, including temperature. Your stasis suit will keep you safe until you've completed the mission. Hang in there. I exhaled through my nose, my fingers loosening and then tightening once again around the bars in front of me. Roger that. There was an audible click, followed by a three-toned chime, indicating that the call had been ended. I felt relieved knowing I could just radio the surface if something came up. Another bright spot zoomed past, the elevator continuing its journey down. I felt the weight of my supply pack pressing down on my shoulders. I became very aware of how sticky the inside of my gloves felt against the palms of my hands. Depth status, 1,000 meters. Approximate external temperature, -30 C. Unease grew within me tangling into a knot deep in my gut. I could do nothing more than readjust my fingers around the metal bars, watching the light slip by. Time seemed to slow down and speed up in bursts. I didn't know how quickly or slowly I was moving. At times it felt as if the elevator had shifted directions and was pulling me up instead of down. I became more and more disoriented, though I found comfort in the constant, periodic depth updates. Depth status: 1,250 meters. Depth status: 1,500 meters. Depth status: 1,750 meters. I knew the ride down wouldn't last much longer, and so I braced myself. I released the bars, stepping backwards until my pack made contact with the back of the elevator, the plastic casing clinking against the steel bars. I bounced from foot to foot, preparing myself for my mission, watching as the lights fell away. Depth status: 2,000 meters. Estimated arrival time: 10 seconds. My body became hyper-aware of the suit that was encasing it. Every breath and burn within my chest, my fingertips tingling in anticipation. Somewhere within me, gnawing at my courage, was fear. It kept me in check, reminding me that I was the fourth person attempting this mission. It forced me to stay alert and gave me the extra kick of adrenaline that I needed to go forth with my task and be the first one to actually complete it. The elevator made a violent bang as it collided with the surface. The metal box rocked and heaved as it adjusted itself to the docking platform, throwing me from the rear to the side. I steadied myself against the bars, regaining my footing. You have arrived at the desired location. Mission protocol in effect, explained the automated status system. My boots crunched once they made contact with the ground. I shut and locked the door behind me before I looked down to find the surface cover in what appeared to be snow. I set the mapping software into tracing mode, which would allow it to track my movements to map out an area. I looked up and around, turning in place as I tried to fathom what I was seeing. I was in a massive cavern, the walls matte and gray like the skin on a rhino. There was a soft, white light coming from somewhere high above me. It lit the room up the way the moon would in a forest clearing. There were no man-made lighting fixtures that I could see. They wouldn't have been necessary anyway with how bright it already was. The ceiling was too far up for me to get a good look at, but what looked like snow seemed to be falling from some source at the top, completely obscured by shadow. Across the room was a pair of monolithic stone doors. They were carved out of a glossy, ivory material that glistened as if wet in the pale light from above. Intricate, swirling patterns covered the doors, along with strange runes made of lines and dots, their facets and curves bouncing brightness and shadow along the length of the doors. To the sides of the doors were rusted metal crates labeled barricade material. Tillers of stone and lumps of darker rocks were piled on top each other, each crate overflowing with debris. To the left of the doors, a bit farther behind the crates, was a large blue tarp covering an expansive, bumpy mass on the ground. Patches of snow-painted portions of the tarp white, while small rivulets slid to the ground where the buildup grew too heavy. I approached it tentatively, unsure of what to expect. I grabbed a corner of the tarp and lifted it, crouching down to get a better look with the light from my headlamp bones. There were hundreds of what looked like human skeletal remains, laying side by side, layered on top of each other with only a thin, knit mesh between each row of bodies. I dropped the tarp and backed away, pressing the button on my wrist as I faced the doors. They were massive, towering so high that the cavernous ceiling cloaked the upper ends in darkness. I wondered how something like this could have been constructed so far underground. I wondered what purpose it served. "Please state your command." The electronic voice interrupted my thoughts. I felt fear dancing through my skin. "External status report. Scanning within a 100-kilometer radius." There was a short pause before the machine spoke again. "External status report is as follows. Depth status, 2,000 meters below surface. Temperature, -32 degrees Celsius. Precipitation, 90% chance of light snow. Flora, undetected. Fauna, unknown." My brows creased in confusion. "Elaborate on fauna." "Fauna of an unknown species and or origin has been detected." The silence that followed was too loud. "Approximate distance to fauna." My voice was only slightly louder than a whisper. "Fauna detected at a distance of approximately 15 kilometers northwest." I looked at the doors in front of me, glancing at the compass that was always present in the upper right corner of my visor. North was directly in front of me, and west was to my left. Whatever it was beyond the door. I pressed the button twice to reset the command prompt. "Please state your command." "Contact the surface," I responded, running my gloved hands over the designs covering the right door, looking for a way to get them open. Contacting the surface, I waited anxiously for a response, chewing on my lower lip as I turned my back to the door. "This is Commander Jones. What's your status?" I exhaled in relief that he answered. "This is Cartographer 4. Status clear." "I've arrived at the destination." I paused, glancing at the snow-covered tarp. "I've got to ask, what happened down here?" The commander took a moment to answer. "We don't really know. When we sent the first clearance team down there, they took some photos, and I'll send one to your visor display now." I heard him clacking away at a keyboard, and then an image appeared in the center of my visor. The doors were there, but they were mostly obscured by a large mound of boulders and slabs of stone. The skeletons were lying all over the mound in various positions, like they were applying their weight against the doors and had died doing so. "It appears that the humans you found down there barricaded themselves in the chamber you're in now in order to keep those doors closed." The commander explained, though why they did so is beyond us. "What do you see down there, C4? The photo disappeared, and I described the snowy cavern slowly turning back to the doors. "My external status report also detected fauna down here. The origin is unknown, but it's quite a ways away. It's about 15K northwest on the other side of the door," I told him, finding myself to be oddly calm. There was a lengthy pause from the commander's end. I waited for him to speak, feeling worry crawling up my chest, constricting my throat. Before I could say something to break the silence, he spoke. "C4, do you wish to proceed?" I pursed my lips, taken aback by his question. I might as well." My voice trailed off. "Very well. Make contact once you have mapped at least 5 kilometers of the area beyond. If at any point you wish to withdraw, do not hesitate to do so." I heard his breathing hitch. "We don't need to lose another team member for this mission." He cleared his throat. "To open the doors, you need to apply pressure to the set of circular engravings where the two doors meet. You'll know when it's working." "Commander, hang in there," he said. Before he ended the connection, the three-tone chime signifying I was alone. I stood in solitude, listening to the sounds of my breaths bouncing around the inside of my helmet. It was time to proceed. I found the circular markings that he described very easily. They were the only ones on the doors, making them stand out from the other nonsensical patterns. I reached up, the very edges of my gloved fingertips brushing the circles. I could just barely get my hand up enough to press down on it. The cavern filled with the clicking sound of gears turning rapidly. I watched as the circles spun in place, realigning themselves to blend in with the other whirls and spirals. A resonating boom sounded as the circles came to a halt, and the doors began to part. They came towards me slowly, the heavy stone dredging up mounds of snow on either side. The doors groaned deeply on their hinges as they moved, their weight carrying them out. I stepped back enough for them to open without accidentally getting caught in their path, and suddenly they stopped. Their hinges creaked tiredly, as if crying out from not being used in many years. I blinked, using my hand to wipe the fog that had settled on the outside of my visor so I could see what lay ahead of me. Beyond the doors I saw nothing, just an expansive blackness that leached out into the silvery chamber I stood in. If I stared too long, I could swear I saw tendrils of thick, black smoke snaking across the floor of the cavern, racing towards my boots. But as soon as I blinked, the vision would pass, and I was left staring into the abysmal darkness in front of me. Approximate distance to Fauna, 16 kilometers northwest, exclaimed the automated voice. I jumped, the notification catching me off guard. I knew if I stood there shaking I would never make any progress. I might as well call the surface and have them haul me back up, but that would be a waste. I wouldn't forgive myself for not even trying. Before I could change my mind, I trudged forward, my boots crunching purposefully through the snow into whatever lay beyond. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but a network of buildings and tunnels wasn't something I had considered, especially since it was intact and well persevered for the most part. As I traveled farther and farther away from the doorway, my headlamp illuminated more the skeletal remains of the complex city. It was carved from the same pale, glistening stone as the doors, and was just as detailed in its architecture. The city was composed of high arches and squared roofs, reaching into the cavernous ceiling. It was maze-like and cramped, the towering walls boxing me in between them, forcing me to follow their wide paths. The fitting of the blocks was seamless, each stone fitting precisely in place. Each brick was cut with an incredible amount of precision, the edges straight and clean. The buildings were spaced tightly, backed next to each other without many gaps. All had double doors in the same arch style of the city doors, though smooth and without the engravings. Slabs of stone propped up on table-like structures outside various buildings were carved with a runic script, the style different than of the markings on the city doors. I took a photo with my visor cam, adding a note that the runes were likely the written language of the inhabitants. Pillars supported a net-like structure of arches high above the rooftops, the pillars themselves detail in the same swirling patterns of the doors to the city. I marveled at the masterpiece that lay buried beneath thousands of meters of earth, and wondered what had happened to those that created it. I walked for about an hour, following the path deep into the city. The farther and I ventured, the more damage the buildings had undergone. Significantly more buildings were falling apart, the patterns of destruction resembling the aftermath of an attack rather than the passage of time. I made my way past building after building, pausing as my headlamp ghosted over a particular series of structures. I'd almost missed it amongst the other bent and broken constructs. Rough chunks of loose stone and fine dust littered the area, the walls snaked with wide cracks. Every few steps I had to maneuver around a section of dislodged bricks bigger than I was. On one side of me was a set of buildings, possibly residences. They all bore the signs of surviving a massive impact with varying degrees of success. One was completely demolished, a few collapsing at one side or another. Though carved across them whole was a deep groove, like something huge had slashed across the street, destroying everything in its path. I snapped a few photos with my visor camera before carefully moving on. Approximate distance to Fauna, 7 kilometers north. I yelped at the sound of the notification. Though it continued to startle me, I didn't want to disable them for fear of being uninformed. Whatever was out there was moving fast and coming closer. I had to hurry up and get out as soon as possible. I took a step and was knocked to the ground as the earth around me began to shake. A low, vibrating rumble filled the air, the sound more of a sensation than something I could hear. It made my teeth clench and my chest ache. My vision grew obscured as my visor monitor picked up interference, blocking my line of sight with mismatched pixels of green, gray, and white. Dust and small stones got dislodged, clattering off the side of my helmet as they fell. As quickly as it began, it ended, and I was left leaning against a wall, panting. I wiped the access grid off of my visor as the display screen cleared up, just as another notification came up. Approximate distance to Fauna, 5 kilometers north. It was too close, and I was too far in. I needed out now. Whatever it was, it had caused the vibration and the interference. I had no idea what else it was capable of. I wasn't willing to find out. That wasn't my job as a cartographer. Deeming my mission a success, I set my mapping software to reverse mode. It would now show me the path I took in reverse order, making it easier for me to find my way out. I turned my back on the city, letting the map I'd created lead me out the way I'd came in. I picked up my pace, suddenly finding a burst of energy within me. I leapt over boulders and easily skirted around debris. Approximate distance to Fauna, 2 kilometers south. South was directly behind me. I kept up my pace, my breath fogging up my visor. I rounded bends and ducked under low arches, my footfalls thundering over my heartbeat. Approximate distance to Fauna, 1 kilometer south. The scenery sped by in a blur of white and gray, the snow from above melting instantly as it made contact with the warmth of my visor. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just running, blindly following the line on the map. A second tonal vibration sounded, the force of it using my momentum against me. The pathway heaved, throwing me onto the ashen ground. I slid forward a few feet, vaguely aware of the sound of something tearing. I laid on my stomach for a moment as the vibration continued. That single moment of rest was all I gave myself before hoisting myself up onto my hands and knees, my boots scraping against the slippery surface beneath me, just as my health monitoring systems kicked in. Warning, rapid depressurization, warning, loss of oxygen imminent. The system repeated the notification over and over again, audibly and visually at the center of my visor display, but I couldn't do anything about it. Somewhere, My suit had been torn and my oxygen supply was leaching out. I had no time left to worrying about it. I needed to be back in the elevator now. I managed to right myself, getting back onto my feet as the intensity of the sound of the vibration picked up. Without hesitating further, I broke into a sprint. My ears felt full, like the sound was coming from inside of my head. The buildings quaked as large bits of roof and wall and pillar came loose, crashing to the ground around me as I ran past. I dodged the bigger ones while using my forearms to block the smaller ones from damaging my visor. My display began to malfunction, the screen filling with large sections of pixels obscuring my view. The speakers within my helmet began to play the sound of static, clipping in and out. Occasionally, a few high-pitched notes would sound before the static returned. The warning notification didn't stop, though it grew more and more distorted as I continued on. My breath scraped down my throat, each one more painful than the last, my lungs burning as I inhaled dust and whatever other toxins were present down here. The garbled, almost incoherent voice of the notification system sounded as I dashed around a corner. I could see the light of the entry cavern in the near distance. Approximate distance to Fauna, 350 meters south. A piercing screech blared out of my helmet's speakers as I approached the exit. By this point, my visor display was completely illegible with its interference. Warning, oxygen levels at 40%. I was so close to the exit now. I could see the looming brightness beyond the massive doors. I was almost there. I was a few feet behind the mouth of the doorways when the notification system coughed out one final update. Approximate distance to Fauna, 15 meters south. The vibration intensified, the sound consuming everything. My displays died, and my audio systems cut out. I couldn't hear it, I just felt it. It was inside of my bones, inside of my cells. It was invading my body, tearing me apart. It forced me to my knees just beyond the line where the light of the chamber met the darkness of the forgotten city. I dragged myself forward by my forearms, my gloved fingers reaching out to try and pull myself into the light. The sound pressed down on me as if attempting to merge my body with the earth. The pressure was immense. It was bearing down upon my back. It was rippling across my skin, biting into my flesh. It was forcing itself from my body in screams I hadn't realized I was letting out. A shadow blacker and the expanse around me descended over my fallen form. Tightness coiled around my left leg and yanked me backwards. My screams became audible over the unending sound as I watched my fingers sliding over the snow-covered terrain, feebly trying to grab hold of something, anything to stop myself. The gloves I wore dug ruts into the snow, reminding me of how close I'd come to getting out. I began to kick with my free leg, using any and all remaining strength I had to try and free myself from whatever had a hold of me. My leg connected with something solid, and the tightness recoiled. The tone of the vibration shifted, even lower, the sound no longer audible, but it was impossible to miss. Suddenly I was upright and sprinting. I ran until I crossed the threshold of the doors and slammed straight into the elevator doors. Behind the thin metal bars of the elevator, I pressed a return button in rapid succession, briefly glancing at the open doorway as it began to haul me upwards. I couldn't see whatever it was because it was as black as the darkness from where it came. I did, however, see something, a mass, writhing in the shadows, its tendrils leaking out into the cold whiteness of the clearing. I understood now what those skeletons had been trying to do. I understood now that we had failed them. They died keeping those doors closed. And now, as I was being hoisted back to the surface, fear gripped me as tightly as the entity had. Amongst all of the unknowns surrounding the city, there was one truth. The doors of stone were open, and I had no idea what had been unleashed upon the world. Story 2. Tunda, the Journal of Thomas Wicker. November 3rd, 1910. There are 1,000 ways to die in the Colombian rainforest. I first gained this appreciation as a boy when, and a questionable bit of parental inspiration, Father allowed me to accompany him to inspect our family's South American holdings, in particular a coffee plantation located on the eastern slopes of the Andes. The expedition was considered almost routine, the chosen path well known to our guards and guides. Yet even so we encountered no small number of difficulties in our travels. In one case the hardship was self-imposed. A famous spendthrift father only secured enough Peruvian bark for the white members of our party, plagued the entire way by incessant swarms of disease-bearing mosquitoes. Several of the native porters fell ill with the sweats, to fatally. In another instance, we stopped along our route in a small village to rest for a day or two. One of Father's men, a Mr. Casper by name, went into the jungle with a local girl, his intentions only to clear. Our party received a shock when the girl returned a short time later, naked and covered in blood, babbling incessantly in her native tongue. One of our guides who spoke the language eventually got the tale from her. It seems that in the throes of their passion, Mr. Casper failed to notice the stealthy approach of one Panthera onca, that most deadly of Amazonian cats. The feline made short work of the man, powerful jaws latching mercilessly onto the back of his exposed neck, while the girl, pinned beneath the victim, could only watch helplessly. We found him the next day, hanging from the high branches of a tree, bloodless, and stored like so much meat in an ice box for later consumption. Father, proclaiming Mr. Casper's demise as the ripened fruit of the man's own stupidity, would not deign to give him a burial. Rather, we continued on our way to the plantation, the body left to the beast who had claimed it through those ancient rites of the hunt. All said the trip was extremely educational, if in an utterly unconventional sort of way. Returning home to America after several long months of travel, my young mind was open to the disparity that existed in the world, never more aware of the benefits offered me by the accrued wealth of my family. I am unsure the precise effects Father had hoped my accompanying him on the journey would induce, but I do know that he must have viewed the reality as a most spectacular failure. I had tasted the life of the explorer, the excitement, and the danger, and found it wanting. What was adventure to the modern comforts of a privileged life? I swore an oath to myself that never again would I be deprived of modern convenience, that the most daring I would undertake would be through new culinary experience, or perhaps seducing the exotic princess of a foreign land. I threw myself into this newly chosen lifestyle with gusto, and can accordingly mark to some significant accuracy when Father's eventual hatred of me took seed in our relationship. It is thus with some surprise that I find myself now returning to that same plantation I visited in my youth. Since Father's death almost a decade ago, I've generally allowed proxies to take care of the day-to-day responsibilities of managing the family holdings. Father ensured he employed only the most educated lawyers, selected the hardest-ruled and most obedient men as his overseers and foremen. And so the Wicker estate has continued to run itself as some kind of great machine whose engineer has long since abandoned the controls. This is fortunate, as I have no particular interest in business myself, a fact that no doubt served as another blight on my character in Father's eyes. But current circumstances demand my attention. I shall refrain from again recounting in these pages the strange events surrounding Father's murder, just so I have utterly failed to convince any others to the verity of such tales, and have subsequently ceased to make the attempt, lest I'm thought more cracked than Father in his final days. No matter. They were not there. They did not see what my eyes beheld then or since. Indeed, much as my expedition with Father first opened my mind to the nature of a privileged life, so too did his death widen my perspective to those ungodly, hidden things with which men share this world. Like a jaguar silently stalking the Amazonian canopy, it is due to this enlightened viewpoint, one that allows the existence of the fantastic and occult alongside the otherwise commonplace and mundane, that I am responding personally to the devilry currently afflicting the operation of my Colombian plantation. I received a letter just over a month ago from Mr. Giles, longtime overseer of the facility. Life near the Andes jungle is tenuous at best, with death always a hair's breadth away, as illustrated by my own youthful journey. Yet Mr. Giles reported recent events were perpetuated by something far more than any such commonly suffered maladies. It was this past June that the first of the disappearances had occurred. Initially a small thing, a native man or two failing to show up to his picking shift. Such absences were easily attributed to a too hard night of drinking, or a simple decision to move on from the plantation. The work was hard and unforgiving, and turnover was regularly high among the laborers. But after a week of disappearances, and with none of a dozen or so men managing to return from their absences, it became clear that something more sinister was afoot. Mr. Giles ordered the foreman to interview the laborers forcefully enough to determine they were being truthful in their ignorance as to the nature of the disappearances. Indeed, all that was ascertained by the inquiry was that the victims had to this point all been young men between the age of 16 and 30, and all had vanished some time during the hours past sundown, confirming a further lack of knowledge among the general population. Mr. Giles proceeded along a logical line of reasoning. It was not unheard of for a local predator to gain a taste for man-flesh, much as in the case of Mr. Casper's undignified demise. The foreman organized a rotating series of hunting parties to conduct forays into the jungle, searching for some sign of the murderous beast or its victims, to no avail, since an active confrontation with the culprit had proven unsatisfactory. A number of clever devices were rigged near the perimeter of the plantation, as well as outside the small adjoining village in which the majority of the workers lived. Mr. Giles' overseers were a hard, experienced lot and comprised a broad collective knowledge of field craft and ingenuity, reflected in the nature of their improvised booby traps, tiger pits from Burma, man-catchers from Malaysia, punji stakes, deadfalls, and a dozen other such deadly workings were employed, their construction taking on a competitive air as each man sought to his compatriots. But despite these Herculean efforts, the disappearances continued unabated until almost a tenth of Mr. Giles' force had gone missing. Men began abandoning the plantation in droves, and willing to wager their lives even in defense of their livelihood, with ultimately only one end for men choosing to stay on. The November harvest ripe and unpicked, the beans in danger of rotting, it was with deepest regret Mr. Giles was at last forced to report the inevitability that the plantation's production would fail to meet quota. To be honest, news of the potential loss of revenue did not overly concern me. My family's holdings are extravagantly vast and varied, possessing shares in everything from oil fields in Turkey to fisheries off the shores of Nova Scotia. The downturn of a single plantation would scarcely be a noticeable absence amidst the Wicker estate annual profits. Never mind that the accrued wealth held in banks and markets across the world is already significant enough to persist for at least several lifetimes. And as I have previously stated thus, I am hardly a business wunderkind, possessing the acumen that would allow the plantation to turn calamity to glorious success. To the contrary, I am sure that the crop will fail. Indeed, since receiving Mr. Giles' letter, I have resolved to close the facility, as even the thought of the effort necessary to recover the plantation once this crisis has reached its resolution bores me to tears. I don't need the money, God knows. Better to simply close the damned thing and be done with it. But not yet, no. Not yet. You see, though I care little for coffee or the beans from whence it comes, since Father's death I have developed an obsession with the inexplicable. I have learned far more than I once could have ever imagined. For 8 years scouring the world, defying my more natural inclinations to merely abide in an existence of simple luxury. I have seen things many wonderful and strange. I have gradually begun to ever so gently peel back the thin veneer that separates our waking world from how things truly are. And, gods, it is exhilarating and terrifying. It is in this pursuit that I find myself returning to Columbia, for in his report Mr. Giles admitted that, while he did not know wherein the rumor began that the plantation was being haunted, shortly after the disappearances began a word was on the breath of every man, white and brown, still remaining at the facility, Tunda. The name previously a complete unknown to me pointed research into the matter offered but little illumination. Described as a changeling who often takes the form of a loved one or beautiful woman to lure victims into its grasp, reports vary across the region with little support ranging from one account to the next. Indeed, my study could not even reach a consensus regarding the fate of the thing's victims, whether their blood is drunk like fine wine or they are devoured whole. Most odd is that the creature's shape-shifting ability is often reported as imperfect, with some aspect of the being's true form remaining visible, while the rest is disguised, oftentimes a deformed leg. I do not believe this last. In my experience with the fantastic, such a chink in the predator's armor, some telltale sign enabling the unwary prey to spot his otherwise indistinguishable hunter, is more like to be wishful thinking than actual reality, an illusion of hope. Though I had never heard of the Tunda prior to Mr. Giles' skeptical report, I have known its like. I do not anticipate its identification will be so conveniently forthcoming. Now, having departed from New York to the port of Cartagena, I have nothing to do but wait until I make my landing. I wrote ahead to Mr. Giles requesting he provide an escort to meet my ship and guide me to the plantation. With luck I shall avoid the pitfalls of my previous excursion here, and ought to be arrived to the property within the month. November 20th, 1910. The situation at the plantation has degraded far worse than reported in Mr. Giles' letter. Since I last wrote, good weather favored my ship's passage, and I was pleasantly surprised to be met upon debarkation by Mr. Lyle Macready within Mr. Giles' employ, a veteran of the Indian wars. Mr. Macready is a strong, capable sort, if in possession of something of a sour disposition. Still, his demeanor improved markedly when I revealed the case of good Kentucky bourbon stowed within my luggage, and soon he and the two porters he had secured had me well on my way to the facility. With 2 mounts per man, we made good time, far better than on my previous expedition, and within 10 days had traveled the almost 300 miles to the plantation near the Venezuelan border at Cucuta. The mood of our little party took a discernible downturn this morning as we neared our destination, and soon all traces of goodwill had retreated from Mr. Macready's stony countenance, his eyes shifting continuously from one side of the trail to the other. His hand never strayed far from the large revolver already loosened in the holster worn upon his hip, all the while the looming trees seeming to close in around our little band. We were perhaps 3 miles from the plantation when the smell ambushed us. The customary bitterness of the coffee beans mixed with a sick sweetness as they turned sour. There was something unsettling about that final leg of the journey that took me several uncomfortable minutes to identify the sounds of the jungle, or rather their absence. Other than the gentle hoof beats of our mules along the worn dirt track, the foul air was silent, empty of bird call and insect alike. The land was already dead, the presence of the plantation merely artificially extending the semblance of life. Passing between the fields of rotted plants, we at last reached the facility proper. It appeared much as I remembered from my youth, a high wire fence surrounding the large drying shacks, shucking annex, and mills adjoining a modest administrative building which served as both office and living area for Mr. Giles and the overseers. A bit farther down the road, I could just spy the small outcrop of buildings comprising the workers' village. I recall from my last trip an omnipresent haze of smoke hanging over the huts from cooking fires and stoves, a constant state of bustling motion as the pickers came and went from their barracks, joking and laughing in their shared camaraderie. But now the air was clear, the lack of movement as haunting as the silent jungle. We were greeted at the gate of the compound by Mr. Giles himself. Always a bear of a man, he seemed much unchanged from when I first met him, but for a great deal more gray in his beard. He ushered us into the relative safety of the wire fence where we offloaded the mules and set the porters on their way before proceeding to the office, Mr. Giles hobbling ahead on a makeshift crutch, while reiterating the profuse apologies of his original correspondence. He explained that since his letter the tundra had become emboldened as the population of the camp dwindled. At night its chilling cries, a strange amalgam of animal howl and maniacal cackle, could be heard echoing throughout the surrounding jungle. Mr. Giles had temporarily reintegrated armed patrols into the daily routine, hoping to catch the creature unaware, but the diminished manpower had forced him to participate in the hunt himself. On one such excursion, about a week past, he'd witnessed a man on his flank jerked violently into the brush. Mr. Giles charged after the victim, his yell startling the rest of the stalking party. In the ensuing conflagration, one of the workers discharged his rifle into the jungle where Mr. Giles had disappeared, inadvertently striking him through the thigh. The wound, while painful, had fortunately avoided major blood vessels and was not life-threatening. In the days since, Mr. Giles had suspended the patrols, deciding that the likelihood of success did not outweigh the associated hazards. More so, his injury served as a catalyst to drive out those few workers heretofore still remaining at the camp, effectively making such regular hunts impossible. The only souls still manning the plantation were Mr. Giles himself and the half-dozen white overseers with whom he shared the administrative living space. 9 men all told, with the addition of myself and Mr. McCready. As Mr. Giles provided us with this update, I could not help the niggling suspicion that gradually began to worm its way into my mind. My thoughts turned to that one unlikely detail of my research in which the tunda is able to transmogrify all but one of its lower limbs, though I continue to doubt this limitation. If true, would a seemingly wounded leg, well wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, not serve as a capable disguise? But no, surely others saw the occurrence of the injury, helped him treat it, and what's more, the man remembers details of our first meeting from all those years past. I have decided I will not besmirch his dignity to require a more detailed examination of his leg, at least not until circumstances demand it. Night has fallen as I am ending this entry, but I have not yet heard the strange echoing cries Mr. Giles described. Perhaps some predatory instinct has warned the beast what my arrival portends and sent it scurrying back to its lair. I am not some native, crippled by fear and superstition, nor am I a typical Westerner, handicapped by willful ignorance and denial. I almost pity the poor thing. Tonight I will rest, for the long journey has left me utterly sapped. But tomorrow the hunt begins in earnest. November 21st, 1910. Morning. Gods damn me for a fool. In the night, Mr. Giles went missing along with 3 of the remaining overseers. We are now but 5 left, myself, Mr. McCready, and Messrs. Gerard, Buchwald, and Foster. The beast did not make its presence known. None of us heard or observed any sign of their departure, and thus I cannot determine whether Mr. Giles was in fact the creature in disguise or merely another of its victims. I have drastically underestimated my foe. I have ordered Mr. McCready to outfit the men with supplies and an abundance of firearms. It is my intent to make our way into the jungle and track the hellspawn to where it must now be resting, drowsy from gorging itself, and make an end to it. November 21st, 1910, evening. We entered the jungle as planned and soon had the thing's trail, though Mr. McCready and the others are experienced woodsmen. They did not have the requisite knowledge to track a thing only vestigially of our world as I do. As we went, I attempted to educate them in the means of identifying such trail sign, with but minor success. Near midday we emerged into an unnatural clearing perhaps 20 feet in diameter. Its perimeter was marked by 4 large standing stones about 8 feet in height and covered in symbols unknown to any of us, but appearing to be of exotic origin. My nearest available analogy, some early Proto-Arabic writings I once studied at the British Museum of London. The north-facing stone was knocked asunder by some unknown means, effectively breaking the circle. As the others rested, I made an examination of the clearing, wherefore I came upon a small artifact, the likeness of a woman carved from a white compound, perhaps bone, and oddly warm to the touch. Placing the idol in my pocket, I moved to rouse the men and continue our pursuit, when I discovered that Mr. Buchwald had vanished. Upon this realization, Messrs. Gerard and Foster were driven to rage, their anger misguidedly directed against me. Apparently they believe they would have been otherwise long departed from the plantation had I not insisted on making my visitation, and blamed me for what they now perceived as all but certain doom. As they moved against me, throwing me to the ground while removing large knives from their belts in a wholly threatening manner, my defense came from a most unexpected quarter as Mr. Macready drew his great pistol and in short order splattered the contents of both men's skulls over the jungle floor. Helping me find my feet, Mr. Macready suggested we retire to the plantation, load up the mules with the remaining supplies, and move to return to Cartagena, though a part of me cried achingly to continue our pursuit of the Tunda. I was forced to agree with his assessment of our unfavorable situation and acquiesced to this proposed course of action. I refused to take full blame for getting lost on the way back to the compound, for, as I have said, my woodcraft is highly specialized in tracking those beings of the supernatural. In truth, Mr. Macready should have insisted on leading far sooner than he did. By the time he took command of our route and got us back on the proper heading, twilight had fully set it. I am unsure whether it was my superior perception or divine intervention that allowed me to step past a hidden pit unharmed, but in either case Mr. Macready was not as fortunate. The hole, one of the traps previously set to catch the creature, had been dug about 8 feet deep, the bottom arranged with sharp stakes coated with a foul-smelling substance. Even in the waning light, I could make out the pool of blood rapidly forming beneath Mr. Macready from where he lay impaled, one hand raised toward me in a pleading gesture, desperation emanating from his pain-stricken face. I briefly debated making an attempt to remove him from the pit, but an ominous stirring of the nearby undergrowth made me reconsider. I am not proud that I left him there, but there was nothing to be done, his imminent death agonizingly obvious. His pleading sobs will surely haunt my dreams. I have successfully returned to the administrative building and made a makeshift barricade to bar the door. Tomorrow I shall load the mules and begin my long journey to the coast. November 22nd, 1910. The morning sun awoke me from an uneasy sleep. Moving to the paddock to saddle the mules, I found the poor beast slaughtered, black tongues already swelling where they lay amidst a bed of their own innards. Contemplating my options, as I moved back towards the office, I was startled by a low series of moans emanating from near the entrance gate. Drawing my pistol and wary of a trick, I cautiously made my way to locate the source. I was shocked to find 2 bodies sprawled in the dirt outside the locked gate. The first was Mr. Macready, pale and still leaking from the puncture wound in his thigh, his belt and scraps of cloth tied to stem the worst of the flow. Next to him lay Mr. Giles, naked, his bullet-wounded leg swollen and angry red. Each man in turn begged for my help, imploring me to let him into the gate and shoot the other, who was clearly the monster in disguise. As I stood silent and unsure, contemplating these 2 men and their similarly wounded legs, Their entreaties became first more desperate, then violent. In a sudden flash of inspiration, I knew the only choice to make. I shot both men in the head. To my disappointment, neither reverted to the tunda's true form. But then none of my research indicated such a revealing would occur, even if both were in fact who they claimed. I cannot feel much regret, as neither would have survived the journey ahead in such a state without the mules. I have rigged one of the saddle bags to allow me to carry as many supplies as I am comfortably able, pistol and ammunition ready at my belt. I have now traveled my intended route 3 times in my life, and I am confident I can find my way. Perhaps once I reach the village in which Mr. Casper met his untimely demise, I will be able to acquire a mule or even a porter. 300 miles over sticking, inhospitable land, stalked by an otherworldly being, is nothing to a man of my experience, a trifle. Yes, nothing at all. I once wrote, "There are 1,000 ways to die in the Colombian rainforest." As I finish this entry, a low-keening wail rising from the surrounding jungle amends me. 1001. Shadow Swimmer 77, Story 3. Not Afraid of the Dark. I always have a torch in my pocket these days. I found a small lead one at an electronics store for a couple of bucks, and I keep it on me at all times. It's actually really bright, despite the size. I bought 5. The other 4 are placed in strategic locations around my house, so I can get to any of them quickly if need be. I won't be caught in the dark again, you see. It's bad enough that I see her every time I close my eyes. I don't think I could handle seeing her again with my eyes open. But I digress. Perhaps this would be better told from the start. I used to work in an office building in town for the public counter service of a government department that shall remain unnamed. The work was fine. It basically involved taking and checking applications, talking to the public about different services that our department provided, that sort of thing. Nothing out of the ordinary with the work or my colleagues, who I got on very well with. The building, however, to look at it from the outside, you wouldn't think that it was any different from any of the surrounding office buildings. 12 stories tall, very square, flat sides, etc. Nothing ostentatious. It was just a simple office building, like hundreds of others in my city. The building was slightly older than the surrounding ones, built in the 1980s, I think. There was the occasional draft, and the lights would flicker now and again, but no major problems. There were 4 elevators, one of which always seemed to be out of order. They'd fix one, and then another would inexplicably break. There was something with the electrics that would cause the doors to slam shut without warning sometimes, and they would occasionally drop slightly when you got in them. Nothing serious enough for the building owners to actually do anything about, but enough to be more than an annoyance. The lifts used to give me the gibberies. Even before all of this, I used to take the stairs a lot. There were 2 stairwells, one on either side of the building. Both of them were fairly narrow, so if you were coming up and you met someone coming down, then you'd either need to wait in the stairwell bit by the doors into the different levels, or turn sideways and let them squeeze past. They tended to get a bit clogged if there was an evacuation for a fire alarm or something, but I was only on the 3rd floor, so it didn't take too long for me to get from there to the ground, or vice versa. The stairwells were windowless, plain cement with pale yellow lights illuminating them, but fairly dimly. I think the building's owners used crappy energy-saving bulbs to try and save some money. There was a bathroom in each of the different stairwells, on every level. Men's room in one stairwell, ladies in the other. The building managers installed combination locks on all of those doors after there was a peeping Tom incident in the ladies one day, so only people who worked in the building could get in. There were different businesses and departments on each of the floors, and the locks all had different combinations, so you could only use the bathroom on your floor. You couldn't go up or down a level to use another. Because we were part of a government department, there was an emphasis on security. We all had swipe card access to get from the reception areas into the back office bit of my floor, and you also needed to remember your car if you were going to the bathroom. The doors to the stairwells had the same magnetic safety locks as the doors to the back area, and although you could get out by pushing a button to release the lock, you had to swipe your card to get into the floor from the stairwell. If you were in the bathroom, there was a similar button to press to get back into the stairwell. It's hard to pinpoint when the trouble started. It's not like somebody clicked their fingers and everything turned on like a light switch. I'm assuming you've heard the story about how a frog put in boiling water will jump straight out. But if you put the frog in cold water and bring it slowly to the boil, it'll stay in, happily boiling to death without realizing. Had the situation gone from normal to messed up in a hurry, then I probably would have got the hell out of there, and quickly. But like they say, hindsight has 20/20th vision. There was an imbalance of girls to guys who worked at my office, so I quite often had the men's room to myself. Nothing like being able to go in peace, you know. The earliest occasion of anything weird happening I can remember, I was going off to the bathroom, which involved walking through the reception area. I pressed a button to let me into the stairwell, and was in the stairwell, keying in the code to let me into the men's, and the stairwell door shut behind me. There was nothing out of the ordinary in this. The door was on one of those hinges which makes it close automatically. What was weird was that the second that door shut, I got a shiver up my spine. Everything was suddenly quiet, almost oppressively silent. The noise of the radio and the people in the waiting room had been completely cut off when the door shut, when normally you could hear things even when in the bathroom. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but I didn't take my time as I normally might have. I got in, did what I needed to, and got out of there quickly. The feeling of unease faded as I came back into the brighter lights of the waiting room. From there, everything was normal for days, possibly weeks. I'm a little fuzzy on the actual time frame, as a lot of the stuff that happened took place over a longish period of time. A few smallish things happened here and there. The odd cold spot, the odd shiver, like when you feel you're being watched, but I just put it down to stress and kept going with my job and my life. Like I said earlier, I got on very well with my colleagues and my boss. Most of us were of a similar age, mid-20s, and every now and again we'd go out for a few post-work drinks on a Friday, let loose a little and distress from the week. One Friday, we'd closed up the public counter, and all the customers were gone, and we were packing up and getting ready to head out. I excused myself to use the men's room before we went out, but when I opened the stairwell door, I noticed that it seemed dimmer than normal in the stairwell. The light at the top of the flight of stairs, too. The floor above had blown. As I turned to the right to key in the code to the bathroom door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye in the gloom at the top of the stairs. Something, and I can't be any more descriptive than that. something flashed across my vision. A dark shape going from right to left from the door by the bathroom at the top of the stairs, around the corner to the next flight, out of my line of sight. It was fast, impossibly fast, like watching a movie and fast-forwarding to 4 times the normal speed. I couldn't see any details. It was just a black shape, but it seemed darker than the lack of light surrounding it somehow. The movement was the worst, though. Despite the speed, it didn't seem to blur or sway at all. It was a scuttle more than anything. I swung around, away from the bathroom door, and stood frozen at the bottom of the flight of stairs, staring transfixed up into the gloom at the top. I don't know how long I stood there for, but I was frozen in place, too scared to move. The next thing I can remember, a hand clapped down on my shoulder. "Daniel, what are you doing, man?" It was my boss, come to find out what was taking so long. There was something, I stammered, trying to get the words out. My boss looked quizzically at me, one eyebrow raised. "What was it?" he asked. I turned to look up the stairs again. Everything seemed less dim than it had been a moment ago. "Nothing," I reply, shaking my head. "Must have been a trick of the light. Been meaning to get my eyes tested." "Then let's get the hell out of here and off for some drinks," my boss exclaimed. Later, at the bar, surrounded by my colleagues, laughing and joking about the week's events, everything seemed fine with the world. It was warm and bright in the bar, and my sense of dread had completely gone. Had I known what was to come, however, then I probably would have been feeling very different indeed. Things seemed fairly normal for a while after that. I came back to work after the weekend, got on with my job, tried to put what I'd seen or thought I'd seen anyway out of my mind. My job had some perks, one of which is that the department would pay for an eye test and new glasses if you needed them. So I got that done. The optometrist said that my eyes hadn't deteriorated at all in the 5 years since my previous eye test, but it was probably time for a new pair of glasses anyway. About a month after the last incident, I was heading to the gym after work, so I headed to the bathroom to get change so I could run there. We turned out most of the lights, but it wasn't dark yet outside, so the place was still well enough lit to see in, although not nearly as bright as with the lights on, because the public reception area was shut for the day due to the time. I used the public bathroom attached to the waiting area to put on my gym clothes. I put my earbuds in and cranked up the volume on my MP3 player, getting myself in the mood for the run, when I heard screaming. It's hard to describe exactly how it sounded. It was definitely female, but it sounded raw, like it came from a throat full of razor blades. If that makes any sense, it sounded impossibly loud and close, but at the same time, like it was coming from miles away. I yanked out my earbuds, unlocked the door, and sprinted out into the waiting room, fully expecting to see someone being murdered. It was deserted, completely empty, not a soul in sight. I looked around slowly, listening hard, trying to see or hear what had been screaming. I turned back towards the public bathroom from which I'd come, and I could see the mirror and myself in it, and I could see something dark looming over my shoulder. I spun on the spot, bracing myself as I did so, but there was nothing there. I looked back to the mirror, but whatever had been there a second ago was gone. I scrambled for my swipe access cards, used them to open the door to the back part of the office, and ran in there, where my boss was sitting at his desk, packing up for the day. "Did you hear that?" I half shouted. He looked confused. "Hear what?" "I heard someone screaming," I replied. He got up quickly and we walked into the waiting room, both listening hard. After a minute he turned to me. "I didn't hear anything, Dan," he said. "Are you okay? You've seemed a little off lately." My boss looked genuinely concerned. He was easily the best manager we'd ever had and really looked after all of his staff. "If you need some time off, just let me know. You have plenty of leave saved up." He left the offer hanging. I don't know," I replied. "I'll let you know." I turned and headed for the lifts. The sense of unease and dread I had felt was back and much harder to shake this time. What the hell was I seeing or hearing? And what the hell could I do about it? Like I said earlier, had this stuff happened all at the same time, I probably would have bailed on my job and tried to find somewhere else. For God knows what reason, though, I decided to stick it out, see if things would get better. Benefits of hindsight, right? Things started getting worse from there. I'd get Jules walking through parts of the office, or us sitting at my desk. I put in requests to the property service to have the air conditioning looked at, and everything came back as normal. The lights above my desk would flicker occasionally, no matter how many different bulbs I had maintenance swap out. I'd see shapes moving in dark corners on the edge of my vision, and they'd be gone when I turned to face them. My health started to deteriorate. I was jumpy and tired a lot, losing weight, and my workmates were noticing the change. I wasn't sleeping well. My dreams were plagued by shapes moving in the darkness, just out of my line of sight. I had to leave the lights on at home when I tried to sleep. I was too scared of what would happen if I awoke in the dark. As I mentally and physically grew weaker, thanks to stress and worrying about what was happening, whatever was chasing me seemed to get stronger, more real somehow. I started noticing details in the darkness. Long, lank black hair, for example. Nothing clear or corporeal enough for me to be able to give a real idea of an appearance, but enough to make me shudder, thinking about possibilities. More than once, I felt the brush of impossibly cold fingers across my shoulder, turning to find nobody there. I almost quit several times. Thinking back now, I don't know why the hell I didn't just up and leave. I think I might have stayed out of a sense of misguided pride. I wanted to show I was tougher than whatever was tormenting me, or at least to find out why it was only targeting me. Nobody else had any issues at all, and they couldn't understand my misgivings about being alone when I was at work now. I did try to look into the building's history, but everything came up a blank. No skeletons in the closet, no suicides, absolutely nothing out of the ordinary at all. It made no sense, damn it. Everything was about to come to a head, however, as we neared the Christmas season. One of the traditions of the workplace was a team photo every year. We would all get dressed up in our best to have the photo professionally taken, and then the photo would be blown up and hung out back. This year, though, they didn't hang the photo. The day came and went as normal. We lined up together and had the photo taken. The photographer left, and we went about our day as normal. A week went by, and I came into work one morning to find the team surrounding my boss' desk, looking at something on it. As I entered, the team looked up from what was on the desk as one, and all looked towards me at the same time. Something was wrong, I could tell. Some of their faces showed puzzlement. Some showed confusion. and more than a few showed some fear. Without a word, they filed away from the desk and went off to their own stations, with my boss beckoning to me to come over. On his desk was an A3-sized photo, the team photo. He gestured for me to take a look, and I did, naturally seeking myself out from the bunch. I had been sitting in a chair at the front row, so it was fairly easy to find myself. But when I did, everything went cold. "What the hell is with this, Dan?" my boss asked, his voice quavering slightly, whereas everyone else in the photo was completely normal and smiling brightly. My face was almost indescribable. When the photo had been taken, I was smiling like everyone else, but here it looked like you were looking at my face through a fishbowl. I was distorted, stretched out. I looked in pain. My mouth stretched much wider than it would naturally go, eyes slightly crazed. And that wasn't even the worst part. There was something standing behind me. Again, to the eye, it was nothing more distinct than a dark shape. No details could be made out, but the way it loomed over me, it was menacing, malevolent, even. The hair on the back of my neck rose as I looked at the photo. I don't have a clue, Norm. Something up with the camera lens, maybe. I had considered telling him the truth, that there was something that seemed to be after me, but that's a good way to end up as the crazy guy in the office. As things were, I wasn't even completely sure that I wasn't already the crazy guy. The photo went in the bin. The next day, I found myself posted to a different part of the office, the banking room. For security purposes, the banking room was completely internal and windowless, with swipe card access in from the back area of the office. Once inside, the doors would lock magnetically, and you had to push a button on the wall in order to release the locks to get out. My boss thought some time away from the counter would do me some good, and he'd arrange for an appointment with work-provided counseling services for me. An hour or so into the day, I felt a chill settle into the room. I looked at the thermostat on the wall and was surprised to see it unchanged. Then the lights began to flicker. They flicked on and off again. I spun on my chair, looking for a cause, but finding none. I spun back towards the desk and came face to face with a nightmare. The dark shape was on the desk. I recoiled in horror, pushing my chair back to the opposite wall, trying to put some distance between myself and it. But the room was small, and I hit the shelves lining the wall behind me, tumbling to the floor as I did so. For the first time ever, I could clearly see detail in the darkness, which would seem to solidify for a split second after the lights flickered off, and then fade in the light when they came back on again. The figure was a girl. At least, it was the semblance of a girl. She could have been anywhere between 16 and 50. She was crouched in a squatting position on the desk, knees near her head, hands on the flat desktop, long hair hanging down over her features. She seemed to be looking past me, but then the head turned, slowly, ever so slowly, and her gaze met mine. Oh, God, those eyes. They were entirely black, but in different shades, so you could make out the different parts where the white would normally be. The iris, the pupils, those eyes were full of madness, of hatred, and of hunger, the perverse, unsettling hunger of a thing that desired something sitting just outside its grasp. A single tear rolled down my quivering cheek as I looked up towards this horror. With every flicker of the light, she seemed to grow more solid, more real, as if feeding off the darkness and my fear in turn. Her grin crept slowly hungrily across her face, impossibly why, and the eyes grew more crazed and vicious and larger in turn. She opened her mouth, baring long, sharp teeth, and looked as if she was trying to say something, but all that came from her throat was a hungry, dangerous growl, like nails on a chalkboard. I tried to call out in turn, but nothing came from my throat, nothing except a pathetic, frightened whimper. Without taking my gaze from that nightmarish face, I struggled to get my feet under me. I didn't dare look away, for fear she would be upon me. I'd seen how fast this thing could move in the darkness. Staying as close to the wall as I could, I backed slowly, ever so slowly away, towards the door. Her gaze followed me as she cocked her head slightly to the side, as if trying to figure out what I was doing. As I reached the door, I fumbled behind me for the button that would release the magnetic lock, and hopefully release me from the confines of the suddenly oppressively small room. I reached for it, and my hand hit the light switch. The room plunged into darkness. I froze, all of a sudden feeling hot, wet, stinking breath on the back of my neck. It smelled like death and decay and corruption, and somehow of an aching, burning hunger mine. Now a voice rasped in my ear. I found the ability to scream as pain shot through my body. I don't remember much of what happened next, for which I'm truly grateful. I think my brain has tried to block some of it out. My colleagues heard my screams and came running. They found me in the corner of the room, flailing my bleeding arms and gibbering madly. An ambulance was called, and I was sedated and taken to the hospital. I had deep scratches all over my arms and torso, and bite marks on my wrists. The doctors decided that I had had some sort of psychotic break and done it myself, because after all, who else could have done it? There was nobody in the room with me when I was found. I tried to point out that the bites didn't look like my teeth, and that there was no blood or skin under my nails. But they didn't listen. The wounds eventually healed and became scars. My boss, good guy that he is, arranged for me to work for a separate part of the department, one in the brand new, well-lit building. I remained in touch with some of my former workmates, although some of them now regarded me, perhaps not too wrongly of them, as a freak. Since that day, I've never let myself be in the dark without at least some form of illumination. Most of the time I'll stay in brightly lit rooms or outside in the sunshine. She can't get to me in the light, and although she's strong, she's not yet strong enough to come out of the darkness. I think she wants to get me, and if she managed to catch me and finish me off, then maybe she'd be strong enough to walk in the light. So you see, it's not the dark that I'm afraid of, not at all. It's what lurks in the dark, watching, waiting. That's what terrifies me. I think that she's from somewhere beyond, somewhere behind the darkness, and was trying to get from there to here, and I think that somehow I let her in.